material. There's a gesture towards the object, a movement on the object, a motion with the material. There's a pause, a rotating gaze, years of observing, black holes into a minute, final project, idiosyncratic. If I give it to you or you buy it from me, it doesn't make you a materialist. Materialism is an ugly word. Materials shaped by nimble and inspired hands, hands that know and never know is beauty. There's movement, there's an object, there's material, there's a gesture.
Okay, so today we're going to do this like bowl using coils, and we're going to kind of create a pattern that's going to be end up being on the outside of the bowl shape. So we're going to use the inside of the bowl as the form of this plastic bowl. We're going to create the form for this coil bowl. You know, you can do it the other way around. I could work on the outside of this, but then my pattern would end up being on the inside of the bowl, and it's not necessarily as good of a functional sort of system or shape to do it that way. So I prefer to do it on the inside. And it's also a little bit better so that if the thing gets away from you a little bit and dries a little bit too fast, it's going to dry this way and it'll pop out of the bowl, rather than if it's on the outside of the bowl and the clay starts to dry and shrink and it's on this form, it has nowhere to go and it's going to end up cracking. So less problems if we do that. Now I needed to work on this and push some, put some pressure on this as I'm working, and so if I do that without any kind of liner in this sort of bowl, whether it's a metal or plastic, something I have around the house to use, this plastic mixing bowl, the clay will suction up and get stuck there, and it'll be hard to. I'll have to let it dry for it to pop out, which I don't want to have it dry totally and then pop out, because I won't be able to finish off the exterior of the bowl if it's dried out too much. So I like to take some paper towel and kind of line it in there and make sure I'm pretty much covering most of the sort of bowl. I can worry about some of these spots a little bit sort of later as I work up. So I'll just make sure that the bowl's sort of kept in, so as I'm working I can lay in the clay and stuff, and then maybe fix these other parts as I come up. Right. So that's how I'm going to get it started there. The first thing I need to do is actually sort of make some coils to put into my bowl. So take some clay out, and I don't necessarily need to even cut stuff off with a wire tool. I can just sort of grab some and start making this coil. So I sometimes will start kind of getting the coil going, and then I will start rolling out the coils by hand. Do what you can do when you're first beginning. You really want to use sort of smaller amounts because it's easier to control, rather than a big one that you might not be able to control as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my entire hand to sort of push across. I'm going to go sort of from fingertip to the heel of my hand. So from fingertip to the heel of my hand as I'm sort of going back and forth. And I'm going to splay my hand out too to get a little wider as I'm working. And I'm going to be going back and forth along the coil as it sort of stretches out from my pressure. So, and I don't have to put too much pressure. You don't have to push too hard. So just really just like here. And as it starts to sort of get longer there, I'm going to sort of move my hand back and forth, try to be somewhat evenly in order to get this coil to sort of go along. Now, how thick should it be? Kind of matter. It'll matter how the pattern looks. So usually I don't want it to be too thick. I don't want it to be too small and thin either, because it's a little won't necessarily be as structurally as sound. So I like to kind of shoot for, maybe have my coils be slightly smaller than my pinky. So I'm going to roll this out a little bit more. And this will be my first piece that'll go in and kind of get the whole thing started. So this will end up being the bottom of the bowl. So I have that there. And so I'm just going to then now sort of roll it up into a spiral. And you could do other shapes. This is just kind of a simple way to kind of start on a bowl like this. So I have this sort of spiral. So it sort of looks like those, you know, lollipops you get at, you know, amusement parks and stuff that are sort of made like that, that are big and take forever to get through. So start with that, and I'm going to lay that down on the inside of my bowl, and that's kind of where I'm going to start then work off there. So now what I do is make a bunch of more of those sort of spirals, and maybe smaller, and then lay them around that first piece and then sort of attach it. So then what I'll do is I'll make sure I do a whole bunch of coils, and then I can cut them down and get them to be about the same length and stuff like that. So again, I'm going from fingertip to the heel of my hand as I move back and forth, and my hand sort of splayed out like this, and then as I rolling and this is sort of stretching out there, then I'm going to move back and forth on it, and try to be sort of even with my pressure. Not too much pressure, you shouldn't need too much. You just sort of go back and forth and try to shoot for that size that is just slightly smaller than, thicker than my sort of pinky there. You kind of put this up, so pretty decent. As you get better practice, you could probably go a little bit smaller. But to start out with, it's kind of a good idea to work smaller as far as much as you start with, and then keep it, you know, just a little bit less thick than your pinky. That one got a little thinner. That one, that's okay though. Trying to get one done, one more done real quickly, and then sort of measure out some coils and then make some little spirals to add in there. So once I have those there, I'm gonna, pretty good. This one is actually the thickest, so I'm gonna give this a little bit more, kind of rolling out to get it to be a little more even. So then I'll just kind of pick a size that I might want to start with. Cut this edge off here, and let's say I'm going to make it about that long. So then what I'll do is I'll just create a bunch that are about that long. I'll cut this thicker end off there. It's a little short. So I got 5. I probably want to have 6. So, oh, look at that worked out. Okay. Just to make sure that I can go all the way around this other spiral in there. So then they're all the same size, so they should end up being, you know, just as big as each other, because they're all this. I cut them all to the same length. And again, I'll make these into a bunch of little spirals. And once they're in there, I can see, oh, do I need to make another one? We're short, right? It doesn't go all the way around if I need to add, but I think 6 should get all the way around that for now. So now I have those sticks. I'm going to start putting them down and laying them right next to the main one that I have in there. Well, and I was wrong on the amount I needed, so I need to get this one to be a little bit longer. Put this one together and then see if it's going to match the size. It's pretty good. So now I have 7. I needed to have 7 to get around there because of the size. So right now I have the main one here and the 7. So I don't want to keep working. I want to actually smooth and make sure these things are all together before I move on to another sort of level there. So I will take my finger and just start running my finger across these wound up spiral coils to get them to sort of attach to each other. So I'm literally just running my finger across like that, just to kind of get them to start to grab each other. Right, and then we just go back and sort of do more. I'm not worried about them being perfectly smooth right now, but I do want to make sure that they are attached to each other before anything gets really set up. So now it sort of looks like that. Now one of the things, I have these little gaps in between, so I could keep them as being holes if I wanted to make a bowl that was, you know, meant for like fruit or something sitting in there, and wasn't a problem for some air to move back through that. But if I want it to be something that could hold, you know, have multiple sort of functions and could hold liquid or, you know, food, that's something that I wouldn't want to be leaking out, then I want to fill those gaps. And so I usually just take a little bit of clay and just press into those gaps. And then that also just helps with, you know, attaching, because then that little bit of clay I stuck in there, I will spread around and smooth around so that it will, you know, help with holding those pieces together like that as I keep working on it. And I don't have to get every little thing right now, but I want to get that, you know, pretty well attached and smooth, and so then when I do the next layer, you know, I'm just attaching those to these other pieces that are attached. And then later at the very end, I can go back through and sort of finish stuff off, you know, and add more clay and do whatever I need to do to get it to be sort of right. But basically, we're going to be sort of working on, you know, creating this sort of pattern that's going to be on the outside of our bowl, this sort of spiral pattern that's going to come up. So I'll just keep making more coils and adding and sort of building up as we go. And then I'll be able to, you know, show you how we finish it all off. Okay, important thing to remember too when making these bowls is how to cover them in between working on them. So one of the things I always do is use 2 bags. So I put one plastic bag inside, getting that stuff really, really covered, and then I will have another bag that I can totally wrap and keep that sort of covered like this. If you just put one bag over the whole thing, there's too much air, too much of an air gap in there, and things will dry out and you won't be able to sort of reattach. So it's really important to also, wherever you get to, you know, the first time you're sort of working on it, if you only get this far, you really always got to make sure you've sort of smoothed them at least together. Don't let them all, don't build them all up and then try to smooth them all together later, especially if they dry up and set up. And so, because this has sort of set up a little bit, because I worked on it and stuff like that, my first row that I do in here, I will score a little bit and put a little bit of water when I attach them, just to double check that they're sort of attached in there. So I've already set up a bunch of more of my spirals to kind of fit right in there. They're going to fit pretty close to the rim. So what I'm going to do is before, and these are pretty wet because I just made them, so I don't need to score those. But on this edge here, where I'm going to be attaching more clay, I'm going to sort of score those up. And just go all the way sort of around it. And always, anytime we're doing anything that's sort of similar to this, like if we're, you know, doing a coil pot, we're adding more coils after it's sat for a day and stuff like that, I always want to start my first row with scoring and getting a little bit of moisture back in there. You know, you can use slip, you can use like a liquid clay if you need to, but really what you need is moisture and pressure. So if it's set up a little bit, then you have to kind of get some moisture back in there, score it up, and then just make sure you attach really well, add that sort of pressure. So now I'm just going to kind of wipe that a little bit. I don't want to get them too wet, just enough to make sure that my next row here is going to stay on there decently. So we'll take care of that. Now I'll start adding my sort of coils in there. Kind of getting them set in there. Get a couple on there. And as I go around, I will make sure that I sort of get them just attached real quick. Piece right in here. Then I got to figure out what I'm going to do for these gaps. I could do more spirals, but sometimes it might be interesting to break that up a little bit, and maybe I just put some straight vertical coils in there. You know, take some of my excess coils that I have left over and start using those. So I might figure out about what that height is, and then kind of mark that, and then just start cutting them up. So they're all about the same size. All right. This does not have to be an exact science. Just make a few more just to double check. This one could be maybe a little bit thinner. Pretty close. Got to even that one out a little bit. Let's see how that does. Probably need about 3 of them per gap. Maybe somewhere in that range. Maybe not, maybe 4 is better. So kind of pound them in. Kind of get them set in there and then come back and fill that in. That gap was smaller. dries again. Need about 4 more. No. Maybe. Or a few more here. Okay. That should be good. So I'll get those sort of set in there. So now we have these sort of upright little change in sort of design there to kind of finish it off. So I'm just going to kind of get them so they're set at the rim. And then same time that I'm sort of smoothing these together, I'm going to fill these gaps here so that kind of plug them and then smooth that stuff in all at the same time. So I need to have some clay that I can just kind of grab out of the bag and just start pushing some of that in those spots. This clay is nice and wet and soft, so I don't feel like I need to do any kind of scoring or anything to it here. I'm just going to sort of push it in and have it grab the other pieces and sort of mold them together. And then we'll kind of come across these pieces here. And one of the things I think is the most difficult really about making these bowls is trying to have the inside look as smooth as possible. It's not always that even, so sometimes as you go along you also might want to take a little bit of clay and just kind of fill in any like low spots or gaps that you might see as you're going there. Then we'll take a tool and try to get it to be a little more even looking. These things may be a little bit funky looking when they're all said and done. Then I'm going to kind of try to plug now these little gaps in here a little bit to get something a little bit more even. But also this part right in here is most likely where you get these cracks if you dry this thing too fast. But one of also the ways I can do is come back later and really make sure that I sort of reinforce those sections there along that rim. I'm just kind of going to fill these gaps here a little bit, and then we can kind of smooth out and clean up that stuff later. Now that those gaps are sort of filled, now I can start really thinking about getting a lip on there, which I'd rather do and take it out of the bowl. Before I do that, I might really want to make sure this is all pretty together. So one of the things I might do before I put on that lip too is to take a real soft coil that hasn't been sitting out. And it doesn't have to be very thick, it could be actually kind of thin. And just run this whole thing right along the very top sort of part there. This is where I want structurally to have some excess clay, maybe have it be a little bit thicker towards the lip there, so that it's going to sort of hold all that together and make it a little bit sturdier as we sort of work on that. So I'll just go and push it down, push it up. Just all along there, so that sort of creating this little excess sort of bracket that's going to sort of grab everything at the same time. One of the things I might want to do is grab one of these sort of plastic gift card type things that I sort of touch and just kind of bring that through, and that way I can kind of see. So I'm using the curved part to kind of run, kind of get an idea about where I might have some little gaps to finish and stuff later. And really the best tool you have is your thumbs and fingers in this sort of situation. Come back and just kind of spend a little time sort of smoothing this stuff out. And then double check some of the stuff, and I'll come back and finish and look for these gaps. One thing I want to do right now is I want to pop it out of my bowl here, and then we can see this sort of pattern that's sort of developed. I might put it back in a little bit, but one of the things I kind of like to do is, when I get a chance, is it's optimum when it's a little bit set up a little bit more, is to come back through with some kind of tool. And an old ballpoint sort of works really well. And I'm going to sort of go through, kind of compress all these lines, just to kind of make it look a little cleaner. And then also it actually kind of starts to unify it a little bit, in the sense that in between all these things, this tool, use the same tool the whole time, kind of creates a sort of a mark that looks the same as we go through all these different little pieces. And if there's any pieces, there's like spots between anything that looks like it needs more, you should add something in, then you can. But usually, it's all sort of been smashed together on the inside. You've added some clay here and there and smoothed stuff out. Pretty good. So I'm going to sort of carefully try to put a rim on this now. And there's some gaps. We could either sort of cut some of this stuff kind of flush with these pieces here a little bit, or you can have an undulating lip, that's okay. Or we could add in little pieces too to kind of, but since I did start cutting this. Now this would be nicer to do if this was actually a little more set up, because I don't want this to kind of change too much as it's getting kind of moved around a little bit, but it'll be okay, I think. So now I want to put a lip. I need to know how much do I need here, so we can kind of figure this out by, right, if I go here, and so if I have about, if it's about 8 1/4, right, that'd be 8.25 if we're talking about inches. So if that's 8.25, that's the diameter. How do we figure out the circumference? Well, we know from our math classes that circumference equals pi times diameter. So if 8.25 is our diameter, if we times that by 3.41, let's see, 3.41 times 8.25 is about 25.9. So let's just call it 26 inches. So this is not long enough, but that's okay. Now I can see I have 26 inches. So when I put the lip on, I want to have my joints come and not have them butt up against each other, but actually be a scarf joint, or like a 45s, right? So, and then this is probably okay. This actually piece maybe has dried up a little bit, so I think I will this time use my fork just to kind of cut. And it's actually not a bad idea for these pieces to actually get across the top of them, sort of scored and moved around a little bit here. And then just take a bit of water. Mostly I want to score that too, because the outside I don't really want to smooth. I'll just smooth the inside, but the outside is going to be sort of plain. So as we come around here, and I think I'm going to want these sort of joints to come kind of in some of these divots here. So I'll cut that one too. Another sort of 45. And then we'll take this piece, cut a 45, and probably not a bad idea to just put a dab of water, score those things up. Kind of set that on there. I'm going to try to smooth this sort of outside spot first. I'll lift it up before I set it back down, so that that part there is sort of cleaned up. An optimum is that actually I think it's going to be better for me to put it back into the bowl real quickly, now that we have that sort of on, and then sort of be able to, push against this bowl here as I bring this down, this rim there. make sure this is all on there. I might come back and add a little bit of coil here and there where if I feel like it's a little bit thin in places. Okay, so I got this on. Now I gotta start thinking about the foot. Still needs a lot of work on the inside. You know, I'll take little bits of clay here and there and add any place where I think it's kind of thin or has a little bit of a divot that I want to sort of float out. I'll add in there, right, and just sort of get that. So that's one of the things about the inside is when working on it, we want to get that as smooth as possible, and then we can try to hide some of the imperfections maybe with a thick glaze and stuff like that. So I might pop this back there again, pull it out, and then think about doing a foot. So I really want to do the foot, you know, after I've sort of gone through all these guys, but I'll still be able to do that afterwards. So we could do, you know, all kinds of things as feet, right? We want to raise it up a little bit because we want to be able to see as much of this pattern as possible. So I could make a few of these and attach them. You know, sort of little cords that sort of follows along. And if I did that, if I do a feet like that, that are sort of by themselves attached, I'm always going to want to have 3. Kind of have them centered out, not too far in, not too far out, but right about in that, right when that starts to make that curve. So I want 3 because it won't rock. So we know from our math classes, just like we know how to use pi to come up with a circumference, we also know from our math classes that 3 points make a plane. So it'll settle and stuff. So we want to find stuff like that. The other thing I can do is maybe I want to have a thicker lip to really kind of raise that up. So maybe I'll just make a very thick coil. Try to get it to be somewhat even. And then what I'll do is I will kind of throw it out like I'm doing the slabs. Get to sort of become long enough to come around. And then, so now it's long enough. But what I do want is to be even thickness. So I want to have some kind of straight edge here. And I'll cut, use my ruler just to cut it, kind of create my straight edge to work off of. And then find out where the thin spot is. It's about 3/4 of an inch. So I will mark 3/4 of an inch there, there, and there. And then cut that. So I have about somewhat of an... So now that I have this sort of set, I might want to just score those ends where they're going to attach and just put a dab of water on there. Just one of them is fine. And then what I need to do is kind of get an idea about where it's going to go. I can kind of smooth this together a little bit here. And then I will mark that. Kind of, I want to kind of look to see how, centered it is. It's not bad, like that. And then I'll just take my scoring tool, this paper clip, and kind of mark it. So I want to scratch up a little bit on the outside of that. So, because that's actually where I'm going to be attaching. So I just kind of did the inside line there. Put just a wee bit of water. Probably should score this a little bit. And then put that little bit of pressure there. Kind of double check that it still looks somewhat centered. And so what I'll do on the inside is make a very small thin coil, some soft clay, and I'll attach that on the inside to kind of create a little bit of a bracket. Kind of keep this foot ring attached to the bottom here, just as a little more of an assurance that I'm going to smooth that in. I want it in the end to look like it was never to attach as much as it was part of the piece. When I go back over my little spiral, I'll try to come and sort of finish that back, so where I smooth over it sort of keeps that pattern sort of going there. And then what I like to do is actually pinch and sort of widen that sort of foot. So as I'm doing that, I'm trying to kind of push down a little bit so that it's sort of pushing into the bowl here. And it just kind of gives it a little bit more of a flare, so it's coming out a little bit. Go back through and try to make it look somewhat even. And then I like to do something here. I could just try to push along there, but I'd rather try to do some kind of pattern. And so then any kind of little tool might come in handy, like I could use the back end of this, or really the back end of a paintbrush sometimes works really well. And it might be easier if I had this on a board at this point that I could sort of shift around a little bit easier. So I'm just going to come and sort of create a little bit of a pattern there as I sort of push this down. Sort of just double this, so this design element that I'm putting in here is also going to help sort of hold that down and have it not pop off. But I've done, mostly what we kind of needed to do. I scored it, put a little bit of water there, put some pressure there. So this is just kind of assuring that it's going to stay on there. And as long as I dry it nice and slow and even, keep it loosely covered. Once I'm finished with it, still going to need a bunch of work as far as smoothing out the inside and all that. And then, going back over these lines, that little tool. But now I have a sort of pattern here that I sort of put around the edge there. So, and I'm now going to want to make sure I get my name on the inside here maybe. It's a good spot for it. Go back and sort of put this together. Now, sometimes I feel like something like this could use. It just looks so kind of ancient. I feel like it needs a hole. And one of the ideas about having this bigger foot on it, it kind of raises it up so you can see this pattern. So one of the problems with these bowls, if you do it too shallow or too wide, you can't really see the pattern there. That's when you actually, if you do it shallow and wide, is actually when you really want to do where the pattern shows up on the inside, so you would go over the bowl with the clay. But we want to use a bowl that is, you know, not too wide, not too shallow when we do this, so that we can have something where we can see the pattern, but we still have a very functional inside sort of surface here. One of the earlier ones I did one time, I had this whole pattern, but because it's so shallow, you can't really see the pattern, you know. And like I was talking about trying to finish off the inside, I put a really heavy glaze there to kind of, get rid of some of that, hide some of those little divots and stuff like that. But lately I've been kind of figuring out how to really put the extra effort into filling stuff in on the inside to get it smooth. So the other thing I might do, just to make it look a little more interesting, is to put a couple handles on it. So I kind of create another flat and wide sort of coil like I did in the bottom, and then I'm just going to sort of kind of give it that same pinch I did, but I'm going to sort of try to go somewhat right there in the middle there. And these handles are just going to be for looks, just because I feel like you could use this sort of thing on it, some kind of extra decoration. So I'm going to sort of float them over. I have a wider spot up here, which will be the sort of the top of the sort of handle, and I'm just going to sort of push them down and try to get them so that they're somewhat even there. And then I might want to reference that point there, so maybe I take this and I'm going to go and just kind of do a little bit of a pattern on top of it there, so it's going to reference this point right there. This is different from what I've done before. I just thought maybe the handle should look similar to the foot and could be different from the rest of the bowl, but they sort of reference each other. So again, I'm going to want to score this up a little bit, put a dab of water on there, figure out where I'm going to put it. So maybe I'm going to put it, maybe I'll put it on those points right there. So put there, figure out where I'm going to put it. So score that up. Let's see if I can find this. Right there in the center there, kind of mark where I need it. Scratch that area up. And then just attach and put my hand on the back side there to kind of support me pushing that in there. And before you lock it in, I kind of might want to take a good look at that. Is that something that I want? I don't know. So before I really go back and smooth and finish and do anything like that, I might want to get the other one on there and kind of really think about where I want that. Because the other one I did the spirals on the side there to see if I like that, and I'm not sure I like those so much. They kind of look like ears to me. So, but this maybe would be a different thing. So I'll work on both those and kind of decide what I actually like better. Real important, we let this dry slow, and every time I attach any clay to clay, like I put this new pieces on or put the rim, I'm going to want to have it completely wrapped, right? Even though I'm sort of done with it, or I need to have it set up a little bit more, I'm still going to want to have it completely wrapped for 24 hours before I go back and finish anything off. Anytime I attach clay to clay, it's going to be important. So, there you have it.
there's material, there's a gesture towards the object, a movement on the object, a motion with the material. There's a pause,